good today.
Loud and clear.
All right, and again, don't hesitate to interrupt me or whatever with a question, or say that again, Dave. Whatever's necessary.
Yeah, I can't hear I can hear you well. I cannot hear what other people say.
Okay,
so
well,
if you repeat a question, then I can hear it.
Okay, and if you ask me something, try and speak up a little bit for her sake. I can't move her too far away from me because the most important thing is that she hears me.
So a preliminary silly question.
Yes, okay, questions, comments.
Simple question.
Right.
Yes. What's the difference between an evangelist and an apostle?
Okay, did you get that, Sarah?
I could not understand that. Now, I can clearly understand everything, obviously, on the recording.
Yeah, okay. The question is, what is the difference between an evangelist and an apostle? Well, evangelist comes angelo, the good news. All right, so the evangelist is one who propagates the good news, the good news, or the good message. It's the same root as angel. So I would say it's a general term. So as it happens. Oh, so maybe I think maybe you're asking the question in the context of the text.
Yes, I am.
Okay, in the context of the text, we would consider all the writers of the Gospels evangelists, but they're not all apostles. All right, so John is an apostle, and
but John is also an evangelist.
That's right. He's both. He's both. That's what I'm saying. He's both. Luke is an evangelist. He was not an apostle, and Mark is an evangelist, but he wasn't an apostle. Mm-hmm. Luke was presumably one of the companions of Paul, and Mark is one of the companions of Peter. So they were right in the mix, but they weren't. Neither one of them were one of the chosen 12. Mm-hmm. And John. So who do they leave out? John, Matthew, and John would be both evangelists and apostles. An apostle comes from apostello, which means to send forth as a delegate, as it were, right? So the apostles are those who are sent on the mission. They're the primary missionaries. And then they have assistants, right? As I told you, the whole trick is to delegate if you can. So Mark and Luke would fall into the category of assistants, but they're not apostles in that sense. So when we get to Paul, it's interesting that Paul designates himself. He's got a lot of chutzpah, as he would have said, I suppose, what we would say. He understands himself to be an apostle, fundamentally on a par with the 12, even though he never met Jesus in the flesh. So his status is somewhat exceptional in that regard.
One more question.
Sure.
There are three synoptic gospels, and you choose the middle one as the first. You choose Mark.
John, no, I chose.
Of
the synoptics.
Synoptics, what I said.
Okay.
There's three. You choose the middle one as the first.
Correct. And the question is why?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mark, if you read the introductory material, I think it's. There's nothing, by the way, in the textual scholarship that isn't possibly to be objected to. In other words, it's a very messy business, right? But I think there's more or less agreement that what we have in our gospel called Mark is a later form of what is, relatively speaking, the earliest form of the gospel. So in that sense, so I think there are reasonably good historical grounds for understanding Mark to be the first, even though he was put second in the traditional order. And I think substantively that fits. It works out. I don't think it's an accident because I'm aligning him, as I do on page 1 of the first handout, 129, I'm aligning him with the index of ethic of simplicity with the 0 box, the one-dimensional box, which is the box of faith and the box of readiness. And if there's anything that we can get out of reading today's assignment, Mark, it's one miracle after another, And the constant condition for all of those miracles, as otherwise exotic as they may be, is, are you ready? And if you're ready, you get cured. All right? If you're ready, your blindness goes away, your paralysis goes away, and so forth. So that readiness, I think, is substantively fundamental to the message of Mark. And there's another very excellent passage in Mark on that point, which I'm not going to. I'll violate my usual indiscretion by not telling you ahead of time, because I think it's really it's a zinger. I love it. I just love this passage. Okay, so that's my answer to that question.
You're going in the sequence of the ethics of simplicity.
In terms of my arranging the Gospels, that's right. John is fourth dimensional. He's foundational. He comes last in time historically. But what I'm saying is that just as the thinking now occurring follows upon the last 2,000 years of thought since the incarnation, so John, in a smaller version of that, he's gospel-wise, he's in that similar, analogous position to the thinking now occurring. He's, in that sense, fourthness, speaking in terms of the real trying to be logic. And Mark is readiness, and Matthew is the unum. In terms of the index of ethical simplicity, it's the box where I put the spirit, hope, the military class in Plato's Republic, and also, of course, ethically, it's the disposition of discretion. So it's also to be associated with Badiou's category of science. Category is probably the wrong term. Domain of science, to use Badiou's language, knowledge. Right. So in but I don't want to jump ahead to Matthew, but that's why he's there. And then who's left? Luke. And Luke is interesting because he is understood traditionally to be a non-Jew. So in other words, he's an evangelist, but neither an apostle nor a Jew, a Greek convert, presumably to what we now understand to be Christianity. And also the emphasis in Luke, substantively, is very much a universal emphasis, emphasizing as over against the emphasis on the Jews the Jewish consciousness of Matthew. It's a kind of universal human consciousness, as it were. I have to be very careful here. I don't want to oversimplify it, but relatively speaking, the emphasis in Luke is universal and human, not simply Jewish. It's not excluding Jewish, but what I'm saying is there's an emphasis on mankind in Luke. And that also, Luke is nice, since you're asking me this, what I consider to be, in my terms, a relatively technical question, why did I order it this way? Luke is the guy who accompanies Paul on his journeys, and it is also Luke to whom the Acts of the Apostles, that part of the New Testament that describes what was going on historically in beginning with Pentecost and thereafter. So Luke also reads. He not only writes the gospel of doing the right thing, by analogy, you see, act, but he also, in fact, wrote the Acts of the Apostles, what they did. So there's a kind of real down to earth grittiness to where Luke comes in. He comes in right at the right point in terms of the relationship of his gospel and the Acts of the Apostles, even though you wouldn't know that from the traditional order, because John interrupts in the traditional order. Is that more than you wanted to know, I hope? Okay. Questions, comments?
It's a question, but you can postpone it if you like.
No, go ahead.
And that is, if faith, the word faith, is no longer understood in contrast to reason.
When you say no longer?
Is not understood. When I say, I mean, it's just historically that it has been understood in contrast to reason.
It has been, yes, yes.
Right.
Certainly since the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, certainly with Thomas Aquinas, there's a distinction which is not insignificant in Thomas between faith and divinely revealed knowledge. So what I can know by reason and what I can know by revelation there's a bright red line, as people like to say, between those two things in Thomas. Now in Thomas they're not in opposition to one another.
Right.
as they are in Kierkegaard, right? So in Kierkegaard, you have the ultimate extremity of the distinction between faith and reason. In Kierkegaard, it's put in as an absolute polarity, like two north poles, right? That absolutely repel one another. It's an absolute either or between the two in Kierkegaard. That's not true in Thomas, but the setup for that distinction is in Thomas, because he makes a distinction which I don't think it ever occurred to Augustine, for example, 800 years previous to Thomas, to make. Augustine moves in his work on the Trinity he moves from faith, all right? No question he starts from faith, but he then attempts to actually understand the Trinity. Augustine does, all right? So in that sense, that Augustinian sense, that bright line doesn't exist. Or at best it would be implicit. Yeah.
So what, in the thinking now occurring, what happens to the word faith?
The question, Sarah, are you hearing that, or shall I repeat it?
No, I got that.
Okay. In the thinking now occurring, well, first of all, what happens in the thinking now occurring is that whatever faith is, it's no longer understood to be an alternative, either implicitly, mildly, explicitly, or very violently in the case of Kierkegaard. It's none of those things. It's perfectly, I want to say that it's absolutely identical with knowing. To know and to believe are absolutely identical would be a technical way of putting it for the first time.
So do we need the word faith is really my question.
This is an interesting question, which to which I don't have a quick and easy answer. I think we do need the word faith because the reason to which it is no longer opposed is nevertheless, in the language that I use in the preface to Foundation, reason now has exploded in the thinking now occurring to fit the form of faith. So in order to understand, certainly minimally, to understand how it is that we can have a real trinary logic, how we can have an essentially new form of thinking, we need to understand that is, in some sense, the latest outcome or outworking of faith. Okay. Question?
Follow-up question that has to do with the question you had last week, where she was asking about, why the Gospel of John was set up the way it was, and you said, well, you weren't going to go down that path because it was more about, textual criticism, New Testament criticism. And you said that what we're dealing with in this class is the revealed text, so to speak.
Well, actually, the word I used was received text.
The received text, okay.
I
was hearing
that's a kind of a technical term. In fact, a Jew would understand that. The Jews speak of the received text of the Scripture. And I'm using that by analogy to say how I'm viewing the New Testament. Mm-hmm. It's the received text. Textus re keptus.
The one that's been presented to us.
The one that... Yes, in other words, if you bracket all 19th and 20th century scholarship about taking it apart and layering it and so forth, the one that has come down to us.
Right.
Now that raises a point that goes back to a question that Nancy asked 2 classes ago, which I gave her a So we got two. Now I've got 2 questions. One is, which I introduced, wasn't part of the original question, but it's important to keep in mind that it's first to the Jews and then to the Gentiles. But that actually works historically when, after Jesus dies and we get into the Acts of the Apostles, when Paul and others start going around, they're going first to the Jews. Not as a theological matter, just as a practical matter, do you see? And then the third layer here is that you need to understand that in the Jewish synagogues, there were non-Jews hanging on. You see, they were interested, because things were pretty bad theologically and otherwise at this point in time. So there were a lot of people looking, searching. You see, and one of the things about the God of the Jews was that was really different. There was something there. So there were a lot of non-Jewish people hanging around the synagogue and attending the services and so on, what we would call Gentiles, you see. And so that was also fertile ground, right? Because they were already half in, so to speak, you see, coming, if you look at it coming from that direction. Right? So now to go back to what I was saying about the Septuagint, so if you understand that in the ancient world, for hundreds of years before the birth of Christ, there was a Jewish community, an international Jewish community, but they were, as every other community in that Greco-Roman world, especially anyone who could read and write. That would be the real key point. All of those who could read and write in the ancient Roman world, by the way, did not speak Latin, or right? They spoke Greek. Greek was the lingua franca. You see, it was the right. Just as in China today, anybody who's educated speaks English. That was the right. That's it. So those Jews outside of Jerusalem, for hundreds of years prior to the birth of Christ, they had their Bible in Greek, and we call it the Septuagint. And the writers of the New Testament, three of the four Gospels are understood to have been originally written in Greek, at least the Gospels we have, whereas I think it's Mark who has the Aramaic root, the Aramaic being a dialect of Hebrew. So the Septuagint and the Greek version of the Bible, and so this Bible has not only the books. Oh, and then another thought I threw out, and just finish it. And then you were asking last time about the antagonism with the Jews and how often the Jews are the enemy as such, Jews in the Gospel of John. Well, first of all, John's writing around the year 100, okay? And between the death of Jesus and John's Gospel, or thereabouts 90, 100, a lot of water had already gone under the bridge. And one of the things that began to happen after the death of Jesus, which I think we'll get maybe a better feel for a little bit in the Acts of the Apostles, is that eventually what we call the Christians, right, those Jews who thought that Jesus was the Messiah, okay, they eventually got thrown out of the synagogue, right? There was a war going on, if you want to put it that way, between what we call the Christian Jews, we have to call them the Christian Jews, and the Jews who rejected the claim that Jesus was the Messiah. And that was perfectly, what I want to say, intramural, okay, do you see? But it was real, okay? So it was a real battle. And so the Judaism that we're familiar with is and it was in the year 70 AD. What do you got me in all this history business? I don't. In the year 70 AD, the temple was destroyed by the Romans, leveled to the ground. And you can see how thorough the job was if you think of that thing we call the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, is what's left of the temple after the Romans got through with it in the year 70 AD. All right? That has a lot of significance because the temple was destroyed and it was not rebuilt. It was not feasible to do so. Well, the temple, which you can tell from the role of the priests in the Gospels, right? The temple is a real live center of Jewish religion. Jesus goes to the temple, he cleans out the temple, right? Throws out the money changers and all this jazz, right? He goes to the temple on the high holy days and so forth, as any Jew would, all right? And the temple is where the sacrifices take place to offer things. Well, all different kinds of sacrifices, but for sin, right? Yom Kippur, the Passover, all of those sacrifices, and then sacrifices of thanksgiving and so forth and so on. When the temple was destroyed, all of that aspect of Judaism disappeared. It just was wiped away, right? And the Judaism that we are familiar with is the Judaism of the Pharisees. They survived because they were not hooked into the temple. They were doing their own thing. Do you see? And so when we think of Judaism in our world, I want to say the last 2,000 years, starting the year 70 AD, we're talking about Pharisaic Judaism. Do you see? There is a strain in Judaism that looks forward to the rebuilding of the temple, right? But the Jews haven't been waiting for it in the practical sense, right? So Judaism continues on in the Pharisaic tradition. But the Pharisees and the Christians are enemies historically. And so at a certain point, now I can't pin down the date, but probably somewhere, this is rough, okay? Somewhere 100, 200 AD, AD means short for in anno Domini, in the year of the Lord. In about 200 AD, or as is now called more politically correctly in the Christian era, 200, the Jews, in response to the use that the Christians, and I use the word Christians here carefully, right, to the Jews who were what we call Christians, followers of Jesus, in response to them, the Judaism, as we know it, declared the certain books of the Septuagint to be non-canonical, even though they had been canonical up until Christianity. The reason for that was that in some of those books there was very good authority for the faith of those Jews who believed in Jesus, right? Okay, I'm not sure.
Received text up to the time of Luther. We got it.
No, actually,
Okay.
Actually, in relation to that, I have the question: received versus revealed. What's the distinction? Is there a distinction to get away from revealed and use received?
Well,
instead?
if you beginning with the Reformation, although I point out for my Anglican friend over here that the original version of the King James Bible had the so-called apocryphal books in it. It was only said, that was a mistake. We better not do that. So it was only after the King James Version was created that subsequently they were removed. Question again, one more time?
Received versus revealed.
Well, okay. Received meaning without specifying what church we're talking about, right? The church in general. That's what the church has decided is
The tradition.
the Bible. Tradition says, and that's what we call canonical, right? The canon. So when Protestantism arises, it revises the canon. So for Protestantism, a little bit late for the Anglicans, but for the Protestants in general, the Anglicans shortly thereafter, the apocryphal books are excluded from the canon. So they would not be, in that sense of the word, received at that point. Those particular books would no longer be part of the received canon. But now Revelation, whatever the canon might be, it's canonical because it's understood to be revealed.
Okay.
Does that make?
Oh, yeah.
Does that hit all the bases?
Yeah.
Okay. Questions?
Yes.
Comments? All right. Well, it varies between John and Mark. There's a higher, I think it's fair to say, there's a higher tolerance for signs in John than there is in Mark. This gets to be a kind of complicated theological issue. So it depends on how you're asking me the question. In terms of its I think one theological answer would be that where signs are acceptable, they are a function of the humanity, both of Jesus and of those he's dealing with. Right? It's kind of, this is my language now, a kind of concession to humanity. Kant would say to our weakness, right? If he were dealing with this issue, which I don't think he does. Whereas where signs are, where you're not supposed to ask for signs, and there are passages where asking for a sign is bad faith, you say, then it's more the reliance upon faith, upon maybe the direct commerce with the divine, with God, with an openness to the divine. So, but I think because the very nature of the incarnation is this notion that there's one person who is both true God and true man, as the early Christian fathers will say later on, you've got a kind of, for want of a better term, a kind of tension there. Right? If you're asking that question in the context of the thinking now occurring, which I suspected you were, I'm sorry to have to say at the moment I haven't really given any particular thought to that precise question. On the other question about parables and I forget how you phrased it, but the kind of postponement or deferral of understanding, there are two levels of that too. First of all, parable is para. All these Greek prefixes, by the way, as you may or may not have noticed or picked up by osmosis, any given Greek prefix can have multiple meanings and everything. Like it's almost like philosophy. A lot depends on the context, right? But generally speaking, parable, para, in that context means be alongside of or beside. You see, so that's dangerous when we talk about Jesus as para to patros. Para doesn't mean beside the Father, alongside of the Father. It means of the same substance, as I pointed out to you last time in making a comment in one of the passages in John. So a lot would depend on, but in the case of parable, it means beside, and it's the same. The bull there is the bal, B-O-L in Greek. It's the same bal as in diabolos, in the devil. Not the parable is the devil, although it's an interesting thing that if you only get the parable and you don't understand it, you're as it were on the outside, right? But it's really it's parabolic in the sense that it's beside. See, it's not unrelated to the meaning, but it's not head on. So that's right. Now Jesus oftentimes takes the disciples, and he'll do that, I think, in today Mark. We got to get to the text. In the parable of the sower, he's going to explain it to them, even the disciples. So it's not just the crowds that he only tells parables to. The disciples are listening to him telling these parables, and they don't get it either. Do you see? So he has to explain it to them, and especially in Mark's, I made the slip on the first meeting, and I felt so bad afterwards, so impious, calling the apostles jerks, right? But then when I was reading Mark for today's class, I thought, well, Dave, you're not so far wrong. Jesus keeps, if he had the term, he probably said, wait,
dummies.
A bunch of jerks, dummies. How many times do I have, how many times do I have to make a multiplication of loaves before you get the message, right? And they still don't get it, okay? So, okay, but the deeper significance is that he does explain the parables. He tells them a lot. And again, another thing in Mark, well, I guess I can cover at least in general some of these bases. In Mark, he constantly foretells what's going to happen to him. The crucifixion, the death, and the resurrection. He tells them, I didn't count how many times, but I mean, it's got to be 3, 4 or more, maybe 4 or 5 times he tells them. And of course, this, as we know from John and we'll know from other Gospels, when he rises, it's a big shock. Do you see? So it's almost, you could almost say, why bother telling parables? You don't really have to go out of your way if you're just trying to make sure that no one gets this casually. You could tell them point blank and they don't get it. All right. Now, the deeper thing, which I was trying to get to, relates to something that I pointed out in the context of John, and I think it comes up again in Mark, certainly there in John. It's in Mark, too, in a slightly different context, that Jesus tells the disciples he's going to send the Spirit after he goes back to the Father. And the Spirit is the guy who is going to lead them into all truth, the complete truth. So it's built in that there are, I don't like the word exactly, I'm not sure it's perfectly relevant, but for want of a better term, there are stages of revelation or stages of understanding, and that's not accidental to the message, right? That's understood. But then when you think about it, of course, again, the Old Testament, the bulk of this text physically is there because in the context of the New Testament, it is just a stage. It's probably the stage, you could say. But nevertheless, its intelligibility is anchored in the prophecies and expectations of the Old Testament, of what we call the Old Testament. Yeah.
Actually, I would like Sarah to ask the question, because she left the question about what happened to the Holy Spirit before the incarnation, something like that.
Sarah, did you hear what Voltraut just said?
Yes, that was my question. And
Ask it.
All right, ask it now. Can you restate it briefly?
absolutely, it was these two passages where the Spirit at the baptism rests on him,
Right.
and then also he says he will send it. And at another time today in Mark, there's a point where the Spirit comes up again, and it has this coming, going. It's
Okay. Say again. Last thing.
That's all.
Okay. Well, if you were to refer to the first page of the first handout, 129, there, number 2, which has the unum in it, incarnate word resurrected on page 1 of that handout. Now, this is my this is my way of putting it, okay? But what I'm saying is that after the resurrection, Jesus is embodied in the Spirit, which, if you read it the other way, the Spirit is sharing Jesus in step 1, which is we're understanding here is what's going on in the life, the regular human life of Jesus up to and including his death on the cross. Jesus is sharing the Father, or the Father is sharing Jesus. Actually, they're doing both. If you look at the symbolism on page 1 of that handout, and so in the resurrection, beginning with the resurrection, and in full blast, which is not a bad image for Pentecost. All right, what we have is the relationship now is when it comes to sharing, it's the relationship between Jesus and the Spirit. Whereas when it comes to sharing, it's the relationship between Jesus and the Father up to and through the crucifixion. So if you ask, where is the Spirit in these Gospels, if you mean in the Gospels, especially in the case of Mark, where the whole emphasis is on his earthly ministry, if we can put it that way, then in my language, what I'm saying is that Spirit who descends on Jesus at the baptism is the Spirit that he has, but is not sharing. He shares it as the resurrected Jesus. So the Spirit is with Jesus in his earthly ministry, you see. But the sharing relationship between Jesus and the Spirit is post-resurrection. Now, I don't know, does that...
That's good. And so it is with him and not... Yeah, I understand.
See, the way I put it succinctly is Jesus is sharing the Father. While he's sharing the Father, Jesus, has the Spirit. When Jesus returns to the Father, my language... I mean, that's his language. He says that over and over again. He's going back to the Father. When he returns to the Father, in my language, he now has the Father. He stops sharing the Father in that first sense. He now has the Father, and then but while he was sharing the Father, he had the Spirit. Now he goes back to the Father. He has the Father, and he is sharing the Spirit, and the Spirit is sharing him post-resurrection. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm not sure if there's anything more to that question. Is that all you meant by the question?
That's good for now.
Okay. All right. Are we done with questions for the moment or not? I don't.
Yes.
Okay. Let's try. Let's go back. I hate to do this. It's very risky, but I'm going to keep my eye on that clock. So split the difference here. Let's go back to John. And with the serious intention of getting back into Mark for today. But let's go back and just want to run through a couple of things, especially a couple of things that I may have omitted in the haste against the clock. I did, of course, focus on John 3:3, where, I didn't focus on it, but we talked about it, where Nicodemus, he tells Nicodemus you have to be born again, born from above. Born again becomes, especially in American Protestantism, that's what they're talking about, born again. But and it's one of these problems of translation, right? There's no reason why you can't do that. But ano in this case, anothen, more vividly is from above, born from above, which fits in very well with the notion that what we're talking about here is being born in the Spirit and of the Spirit, right? That this is a spiritual birth as opposed to a natural birth. And I just wanted to say, which I don't think I wrote down on any of the handouts or said explicitly in class, although it's implicit, that in terms of the kind of XX beyond analysis I'm doing on the first and second handouts, that anothen could be read as being born beyond, or being, in other words, what Jesus is saying to Nicodemus in terms of the thinking now occurring's language is that you need to be beyond birth. Now that's very relevant to where I left off in John last time. See, it's not to be beyond birth, because then we would be into some sort of Gnosticism. Do you see that? Right? Spirit does not mean being beyond being born. Doesn't mean that being born is a bad thing, or that we got to get out of this world, either a la Plato or a la Basilides or some other Gnostic, you see, or the Gospel of Philip or any of that kind of stuff, or the Gospel of Judas now, which is all the rage. Okay, all right. So it's Gnosticism that has a contempt for the body, for the natural world. Right. So being born again, if I use that language, just to use the pedestrian language, or to be born from above, or more precisely in terms of the thinking now occurring, to be beyond birth, is not simply to be beyond birth. No. See, that's too easy. That's the same thing as it would be too easy if my men, when he talks to Pilate, if my kingdom were of this world, well then, when I said my men would have swords, that's what Jesus says to Pilate, and if I say to Pilate, as Jesus does, my kingdom is not of this world, if he means not of this world, period, you see, if he means it's just beyond this world, then no problem, we get rid of you, and that's the end of it, you see. But if what we really need to understand there is that my kingdom is not of this world, but it is beyond this world, you see. In other words, it's not that we're going away, that Jesus is not going away in any simplistic, naturalistic sense when he's crucified, and that's what the resurrection is all about. The resurrection is, if you want, and I use this word in a sense that's something like the thinking now occurring sense, if it isn't that sense, the resurrection is the embodiment of the being beyond the world of Jesus Christ, you see? Because if he were simply beyond the world, he would have left and he would not have come back. And it gets more complicated than that. We just can't cover all these spaces at once, but I just throw it out there for something to think about for the future. Maybe when we get to the apocalypse, which is the timely place to do this. It's not only that you can't kill it, you see? In other words, it's not simply beyond the world, the kingdom. It's beyond the world. So when you kill it, it comes back in the form of the resurrection. And that's not enough, because it's going to come back again in the apocalyptic end of the world. You say, well, what does that mean? All right, now I'm just raising the question. I can't answer all these questions, but I want to show you something of the complexity of the situation. All right, so to be born again then really means to be born. It's to be beyond birth, not simply not naturally born, but being naturally born doesn't cut it. But the spiritual birth is not an alternative to natural birth, you see. And so the resurrected body is a body. And this is a real interesting theological problem which has been going on for 2,000 years, even among those who presumably believe in the resurrection. Exactly what are we talking about? I mean, what is a resurrected body? That's an interesting question by itself, which we'll hold for now. Okay. Okay, and in 656 of John, I think we certainly alluded to it. I can't remember whether we actually covered the passage. It's central, though, the Eucharistic passage there. I think in John we don't get the formula of the consecration that we get in Mark in today's reading, right? The formula in the upper room on the night before the Jewish Passover, this is my body. By the way, was that your question for real, I mean? Or were you shilling for somebody on that first question? About the hot dog.
That was it was a question that I thought about with Zarina, but that was my question.
Okay, all right. I don't know whether you saw that. I put it on today's handout, which I haven't given you yet. Okay, but there's a form, so we'll cover it in a different context when we get it in Mark. In Mark, the formula is Jesus says, sharing the bread with his disciples the night before he dies. This is my body, and then he says, "This is the cup of salvation, cup of my blood, salvation, so the new covenant, etc." Okay, so we don't get that statement that's repeated by the other three evangelists, since you've introduced that word, in John. But what we get in John is a totally different context in this kind of, with no, not meaning this in any negative sense, but in a kind of much more theological, free-floating kind of way. We get the presentation of that Eucharistic idea in this passage here in 6. And what did I say? It was 656. Yeah, the trouble with the pages in this, they're so thin that it's hard to find them.
Page 1758.
Yeah.
See, look,
Yeah.
on the top left.
And after the first, what's the second indentation? Well, actually, if we start toward the top of the page, anyone who eats this bread will live forever, and the bread that I shall give is my flesh for the life of the world. And then, of course, the natural objection: how can this man give us his flesh to eat? And by the way, I can interrupt myself here, and say exactly what's analogous to the problem with Nicodemus. What are we talking about? Born again, see? Now, a simple answer would be, as he says later on, if I can find this quickly, dropping down to verse 63, it is the Spirit gives life, the flesh has nothing to offer. The words I have spoken to you are spirit, and they are life. Well, now, if I were a Gnostic, see, it would be simple. You're just talking, spiritually, of course. No, that's not a problem. I don't mind eating you spiritually. Do you see? It's not a problem. I mean, it could be a problem if you don't believe, if you're Thomas Jefferson, it'd be a problem, right? What is the Spirit? Okay. But even Thomas Jefferson could have it explained to him, because if you could explain, it's interesting that I bring that up, because Jefferson said that if spirit means anything, it's material. And so if you mean by spirit non-material, Jefferson says there's no such thing. If you mean by spirit material, some kind of ethereal material, okay, he'll buy that. But don't tell me there's anything that isn't material. That's where Jefferson's at. What got me off on that is, if you mean something that I can't see or feel, or is, if that's what Jesus means by spirit, there would be no problem, as it were, or it wouldn't be the offense that it is when it's understood that this is an obscene idea, eating your flesh, you're drinking your blood. You can't be serious, right? The point I'm getting at in the beyond nature, do you see? Beyond the natural, is that whatever that resurrected body or that Eucharistic body, which really can't be separated here, you see, whatever that is, it is not spirit opposed to nature. It is not it's not opposed to the physical body, right? So it has some kind of corporeality that's real, you see, and how do you reconcile it logically, ontologically, in the thinking now occurring? It's a piece of cake, if you'll pardon me for saying so, not a hot dog now. All right? In the thinking now occurring, it's a piece of cake, because if you understand that the reality that we're dealing with is being beyond X, do you see? Then it's not a logical problem. Now, I'm not saying you may still have, if you're really bad, you can still find reasons to be offended, do you see? But you can't be offended simply because it's an intellectual problem. It's not an intellectual problem if you have an absolutely new logic. You see? Okay. But just to come back, the other point I wanted to draw your attention to, which I probably alluded to, in 56, just go further up the page, maybe 40% down the page. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood lives in me, and I live in that person. So there you have that symbolism that I put on the first handout, which is already part of one of the afterwords of Beyond Sovereignty, the notion of embodiment, right? So to participate in the Eucharist, to eat the flesh and blood, is to live in Jesus, and Jesus lives in you. So that's his way of putting the question his way of putting the question that's in the question that you raised on the forum about what's going on when I eat the hot dog, if we understand in the thinking now occurring that not simply are the consecrated bread and wine the body and blood of Christ, but also, in some sense, the universe is the body and blood of Christ, well, then the hot dog must qualify. That's the root of your question, which I'm not going to rehearse in detail now. But what I'm saying is the link I want to bring here is the embodiment notion, right? So to consume the body and blood of Jesus is to be embodied in him or he embodied in you. In fact, at first glance, you would say you're embodying Jesus. If he's there in the bread and wine and you eat him, then you would say, I think you would say you're embodying him. That would be our natural way of thinking in everyday terms. Thinking a little more deeply, anything you embody embodies you. A little more crudely, anything you use uses you. Watch your step. There's no such thing as a one-way street in reality. Okay, so I just wanted to link it there with that particular symbolism. It's more than symbolism, okay, but the stick figure is a symbol, but the symbol is the symbol of a real relation.
There was one point. There was one thing that this is probably going to take a little bit longer to understand, but the properly embodied versus improperly embodied that you put on the form in response to the question, I did not totally understand. Could you say a little bit more about that? I think you referred to Paul.
Okay, all right. You forced me to do something I didn't want to do. So, would you distribute that? There should be at least one left over there.
Two.
Two. You're right. Whatever there are, just pass them back up. I'm now distributing, Sarah, today's handout.
Okay.
And did you got that, right? Okay. See, do I have
it.
Yeah.
Was that a question from Todd, Dave?
Yes, that was. Did you get his question?
I did, except which pages, when he mentioned, I also was wondering about properly embodied and improperly
Yes.
embodied.
Okay. So I happened, fortunately, I recreated his question on today's handout, which begins on page 3. I suppose we might just well do it now, and we'll at least be sure of doing something of Mark in the process, right? All right, so Todd's question on page 3, reproduced on page 3 of the handout, is in the Eucharist I consume the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Christ. When I eat the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ embodies me. That's the premise of Todd's question. And I say in response to Todd, yes, that's great. You are embodied in Christ's living body when you consume the Eucharist. And then Todd didn't ask, he didn't raise this issue, but since it's my job to complicate things in the way of producing perfect simplicity, okay, I said in response, yes, that's right as far as it goes, you see. But the question the question is not whether when you consume the Eucharist you're embodied in the body of Christ, you see, but whether you are properly embodied or improperly embodied therein. And then I say to be properly embodied therein is in Paul's language, and I'm jumping ahead. We're going to do this eventually, right, when we get to Paul's letters. But in 1 Corinthians 11:29, Paul deals with this issue that I'm bringing up. And he said, and I say, so to be improperly embodied therein is in Paul's language to be eating and drinking this, touton, bread and cup, all right? So that refers to the explicit language of Jesus at the Last Supper. Paul says, if you do that, and this is quoting Paul now, not distinguishing the body, you can translate, again, the number of ways, not recognizing the body, a little more loosely, but I think in very good English of what he means with not perceiving the body, where perceiving is to distinguish it from other things, to perceive it, that's what you're dealing with. Not perceiving it more closely, not discriminating it, not distinguishing it, all right? If you don't do that, he says, and then I just paraphrase, the consequence, and Paul says this explicitly, you eat and drink to your krina, is the Greek he uses, to your judgment, right? And judgment here is that kind of judgment I was talking about last time when I was commenting on John's text where Jesus says that those who live in him, who eat his flesh and blood, and when they rise from the dead, they will rise to life. And those who don't will rise to judgment. Right? So the judgment, strictly speaking, the judgment is something you pass on yourself I made the point that the good news is that the only one who's qualified to judge another, take the woman found in adultery, Jesus says, who threw no one threw any stones at you? Well, he's busy making notes for the next town he's going to or something. Well, then neither do I. I don't judge you either, right? But then notice when he sends her away, he says, sin no more. Okay? So there is a judgment, but the judgment is the judgment that is the same thing as not perceiving the body. You see? And
right.
Where that perception, that recognition, that discrimination, so if I put it in terms of the thinking now occurring in the ethic of simplicity, strictly speaking, it's the element of discretion. Do you see? Now you can't discrete. Now I'm playing around with this. Is not good English, but it's good thinking. You can't discrete the body. I don't say excrete the body. Right? You can't discrete it. You can't distinguish it. Unless, of course, in the language of thinking now occurring, you're first open. You say the openness precedes the reception. I use the terms interchangeably, reception, and this becomes an issue for me when I'm trying to explain specific. That's right. It's the filling of what otherwise is a sheer openness, readiness, with a specific content or a difference. The difference in this case, you see? The difference that makes all the difference, or is all the difference in the world. Yes. Okay. Does that in any way answer your question? I don't know whether we should... well, let's do the hot dog thing while we're on it. There's no point in jumping back and forth. All right, so the next part of Todd's question, which I've segregated out here, 1, 2, 3, and so forth, is what is the essential difference between eating the host and eating a hot dog? Now, the background for the question, which is understood by me, is that the fundamental notion of the thinking now occurring is that if it wasn't clear, crystal clear before, it is now not only clear, but it is thinkable how it is that the universe is a body. And if you say, well, what body... all right, so now we have the question raised by Nancy, well, what is a body in the thinking now occurring? You say, okay, fair question. And I gave some part of the answer to that question last time. A body is a sending and a being sent. It's a sharing. It's or being shared, right? And it's whatever it is, it's not a container. So it's a kind of, it's an open, so let's play with this, right? So it's an openness that's filled, which is, in other words, discreted, with an absolute specificity or an absolute particularity. And that absolute particularity, which could be, if you want to multiply it as all the parts of this body, which is not a container, is, however, are all of them parts of the body of which they are the parts, right? So in other words, in each of those parts, I see Christ. Each particular person is Christ. I don't want to pursue the image because it's distorting, right? See what I'm saying? But in other words, there's no opposition of thinking now occurring between part and whole. Okay, so whatever the relationship is between the infinite the particulars of the infinite particularity, you see. Well, as I've said in different contexts, it's perfectly free, but it's in the case of this comes to the hot dog. In the case of human persons, it is in some real sense, when I'm dealing with the other person, I'm dealing with someone of whom I can truly say, you are the Jesus Christ who is the beginning, to quote myself, which I think I quote in one of these handouts, probably the most recent one, where I'm quoting myself from section 3.5 of Foundation. All right. The point being there, it goes to the question of, it's the last part of your question, the priest and the hot dog, can the consumer of the hot dog become a priest or something? We'll get to it. But I'm going to come back to this part of the question. So I'm just giving you the background. So if you assume that the universe is, in the thinking now occurring, the body of Christ, then the hot dog, as a part of the universe, must be part of that body. That's the background of the question. So then the question, in effect, is what's the difference? Isn't that what? Yeah, that's what. what is the essential difference between eating the host and eating a hot dog? All right, so my answer is this. And here I'm quoting Mark, thank God. This is my body, all right? But by the way, this language is exactly repeated in Luke and in Matthew. So it's kind of gives you a kind of sense of how unaccidental it is, if you know what I'm saying, how important it is that all the other varieties of the story, it's word for word when you get to this, what you could call fundamentally central, if there is a center where the center is everywhere, right? This is my body. This is my blood. I've abbreviated the whole passage, right? This tutu, bread, and this cup is to be distinguished as the Lord's body. The essential difference is that the host is the bread deictically. That's a word we don't use in everyday language. I first found myself introducing it in Beyond Sovereignty when I'm dealing, I think, with Agamben. Somewhere in my critique of Agamben, I have the occasion to resort to that language. He raises an issue, Agamben does. Because remember, Agamben is all too into whatever. It's whatever being, you see. Now, one possible, and he's not stupid. He's not an idiot. Okay, so what the hell is he talking about? How can I take him seriously? He's talking about whatever being. Well, the word "this" applies to whatever. Do you think? Okay. So Agamben's coming from somewhere. Now, where's he coming? Well, it's ultimately like all these guys. He's coming from Hegel. If you've ever read, and if you haven't, I urge you to do so. If you think of thinking now occurring is bad, this will sober you up. I'll give you some perspective. Read Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. The Phenomenology of Spirit by Hegel, sometimes translated as the Phenomenology of Mind, because Geist, mind, spirit, can be translated either way. So Hegel has a relatively early work, relatively early. It's not. I don't mean early like his theological writings, but in other words, it's not the finished. It's much more spontaneous. It's much deep. It's very deep. It's really profound. And the first thing that Hegel does in the Phenomenology of Spirit is to deal with this question of the use of the term "this" and such terms. These are deictic terms. These are terms which, now I'm going to speak in pedestrian language, which is inaccurate, so you can't hold me to it. I'm cheating. What this means, that's the wrong word. That's like self means. Doesn't mean anything. But in ordinary way of speaking, what this means I can't really know unless I see what you're pointing at, or right, you see, or what you're looking at when you say this. So if I say this paper, well, you know what I'm talking about. You know what this paper is. No, not a problem. You say, but Sarah's having a little trouble. She can imagine what I mean by this paper. See, but she can't know for a fact that this paper is the handout of 2.5 and the handout of 2.12 that's being held in my right hand. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, so that's his takeoff point. To oversimplify this profound work, Hegel focuses on the universality of the this, which is a typical Hegelian thing to do, right? So that's where he goes with it, see, because he doesn't like the idea of having to point to something. That's not very philosophical.
Get to the end of it quickly. No, I'm talking to Hegel. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No, well, to me, it's a lost cause. Whereas the thinking now occurring is saying no. What the thinking now occurring is all about. It's all about the fact that all reality is absolutely deictic. The so-called universal cannot be abstracted, in fact, from the particular. You see, and not even now. Here's the real difference between Hegel philosophically. It cannot even be abstracted in thought. You see, that thought does not only does not require, but it does not permit the abstracting of the this from what, in this case, Jesus is holding in his hand, or in the example a moment ago, what Leahy was holding in his hand. You cannot think the this apart from this bread or this paper, as the case might be. That's the thinking now occurring. The easy proof of that in the thinking now occurring is that crazy thing known as real trinary logic, where in real trinary logic, didn't I say this on the first day because I had been doodling at home? Did I tell you I was doodling with zeros and unums and ones? I did this. And I just wrote out a string of 0, unums, and ones haphazardly, you might say randomly, because I had nothing better to do, which is some of the best times you can ever have when you have nothing better to do. And then I started to factor it, as it were. I started to reduce it. And I reduced it to 1, which you can do by saying the unum next to the 0 is a 1, and the 2 unums next to each other are a 1, and I got down from whatever I had, an arbitrary set of 12 digits, and I got down to 1. And I thought to myself, well, let's try it. Let's do that again. And I did it, and I went down a different way. I got to unity, you see, but there's no predictable way of doing that. I can't know, you asked about the Spirit blowing this way and that, Sarah. You see, the Spirit is the very, pardon the expression now, in the thinking now occurring sense of the word, the Spirit is the very embodiment of unpredictability. Do you see? And the Spirit is He who will lead us into all truth. You see, so He is the vehicle of the truth and the vehicle aren't going to be two different things here. You see, and we're going to have an absolute particularity. We're going to have an absolute intelligibility in which, Pache Hegel, I can't separate the this from what I'm pointing at. You see? In thought, I can't do it. And the logic demonstrates that. In order to know what 0 unum 1 0 1 0 0 0 unum 1 0 unum, how it is or is not 1 or unum or 0, because I don't know ahead of time. I just said it. We got this on tape. We could try it when we get home. Right? I can't know until I do it. And when I do it, I'm going to find that my doing it is going to be inseparable from the solution. You know the solution in math? When you were in high school, you like to cheat, right? In math texts, they always have the answer in the back. Why did they do that? Why did they do that? It's perverse, right? It's not perverse in math, because the whole point is it isn't the answer. It's the solution that counts. You see? And what I'm saying is that the solution to any arrangement of the logical digits is inseparable from, you cannot know the solution apart from the act of the solver. I like that. I don't like solver, but it's not bad. Okay, see? Okay, now what was that all about? Oh, well, that has something to do with the Last Supper, right? So I'm saying it's not accidental in the context of thinking now occurring that the words of concentration repeated verbatim by each of the evangelists involves this. So, for example, to put it crudely, Jesus does not say, bread is my body and wine, which would be the equivalent, in effect, of saying, the hot dog is my body, right? When the words of concentration are this specific, right, in that sense. So I say, so the essential difference is that the host is the bread deictically, and then I'm translating that as not mediately. I'm doing it that way because I'm going to play with that in the next set of parentheses, or the one following the next. This tuta, bread, identified by Jesus as his body and blood. The hot dog is food, not deictically. Now, the reason I did it in the negative is to show you not deictically, not immediately, but in the thinking now occurring, not deictically is not a double negative in the self-conscious sense. We don't go backwards with that. Do you see what I'm saying? So the hot dog is food, not deictically, not immediately, not this hot dog identified by Jesus as his body. Now, let's see if I can jump ahead. I'm going to read this in a minute, I guess, but I want to just make sure. I don't know if it's on the paper or not. But then the objection should arise in your mind. You're already there? Go ahead. Can you articulate the objection?
Well, the objection I would have immediately is then wouldn't the hot dog and the actual host be identical at that point?
Well, I'm not sure why you're saying that, though.
Because it's not deictically what Jesus is pointing to in terms of what would be the bread and body. When he at the Last Supper, he consecrates, oh, by the way, I'm glad I said that. The Greek, and your continuing question is in my mind, you understand, just because I couldn't give an easy answer. This question about glory, it's really nice.
I did give you a provisional answer last time, that whatever glory is, the glorification is mutual. It's like embodiment. Right? So when the Father embodies Jesus and Jesus embodies the Father, or one shares the other and the other is shared by the other, glorification is in the crucifixion. He glorifies the Father and the Father glorifies him. And I think I did say it goes to the notion, it's analogous to the notion of doxa is the root, and then we keep stumbling over the fact that if I were a Greek, not a Hebrew Christian, you see, I would think of doxa as a kind of questionable thing. Certainly if I was a Platonist, right, as opinion is over against the truth, you see. But here, what would, see, this is, it's the same as the critique of Hegel. Do you see that? In other words, you're abstracted this from my arm, my finger. Are you going to abstract this paper from this paper? No. Yeah. What are you talking about? Okay. So the glorification is equally concrete, and the embodiment is equally immediate. And consecration and the words that Jesus articulates, which are repeated. Now, this is the question I thought you were going to ask. By the priest. Now, wait a minute, Leahy. Wait, hold the reading. Slow down. Not so fast. Okay? You just emphasizing that in that room on that night, Jesus holding a particular piece of bread, a loaf probably that he was sharing, this bread, meaning these pieces of this loaf that I'm distributing. This is my body. These pieces are my body. Okay, I understand the difference between, he didn't say that of this hot dog, you see, but how does the bread in St. Patrick's Cathedral, how does that work? Because everything depends on, right, you see? Now, where embodiment really comes home to roost, you see? Who's consecrating the bread in St. Patrick's Cathedral?
The priests are, right?
Yeah, but who is the priest when he's consecrating the bread? He's Jesus. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, I think I do get to that answer, so I'll hold that because it has to do with the question of ordination. Let me come back.
You were going to say something about consecration.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. So consecration is not exactly the word that is used in the Greek. It's eulogia, we might say, in Brooklynese. Eulogia. It's the root of our word eulogy. It's nice. I kind of like it because when we have a eulogy, most of the eulogies we're familiar with are at somebody's funeral. And of course, the Eucharist is the night before he dies, suffers and dies, and it's the shedding of his blood is what the wine is, right? So Jesus pronounces his own eulogy, to say, but the meaning in the eulogy is blessing. It also means, as the word suggests, like euangelos, right? The good news, the good message. It's good. It's got a lot of resonance. It's that which is well said, to put it mildly. You see? Okay. But it's a blessing, and in that sense, a consecration. So I'll hold the priest a moment till we get to part 5. Let me finish this answer. So while in the thinking now occurring at the top of page 4 of the handout, for the first time, this tutu hot dog is likewise not, now this hot dog, all right, so if I have a hot dog, I don't happen to have one here, but if we had one, you can imagine this part, it would be this hot dog, it would be as much of this hot dog as the bread consecrated or unconsecrated would be this bread. You see? Okay. So while this hot dog is likewise not as such the body and blood of Jesus, no more than other breads or wines not didactically identified by the this of the words of blessing, thanksgiving, there it is, glorifying. I'm playing with that because there are contexts in which that root, eulogia, in certain verbal forms can be translated as glorify. Okay, so it's not the common translation, but I'm saying substantively that's what we're really talking about here, right? So when the Father glorifies the Son and vice versa, they speak well of each other. You see, when I glorify my Father by speaking well of him, but not just speaking with my whole being, because I am the incarnate Logos. You see? So the death of Christ on the cross is a eulogy, but the eulogy that he pronounces over himself in the Last Supper is a eulogy, as it were, for the Father. This is where Tom Altifer comes rushing out and says, "I told you God died." That has to be parsed. You see. But in some sense, in the sense in which in that appendix to Beyond Sovereignty, when I do the appendix 2 with the, I forget how I put it, the title, persons and relations of persons or something like that. Categories. I think it's categories and relations of persons, something to that effect. There's a rather intricate thing there, which we did in class last year, in which I show how you cannot absolutely separate the persons of the Trinity other than the Word. You cannot absolutely separate them, in the first instance, from humanity, nor then from the universe with which humanity is identified. Okay? Or by the priest. I'm going to hold it again because I think the answer comes in 5. Nevertheless, this tuto, this hot dog, I don't know what the Greek for hot dog would be, didactically otherwise identified, all right, is a material part, and this goes back to what I was just referencing, of the body of Jesus. It is materially the person Jesus. So if you buy Appendix 2 of Beyond Sovereignty, the distinction between absolute, essential, formal, and material persons, then the hot dog is, so in other words, the question is not an idle question and really gets to the heart of what is attempting to be said here in a more, you'll pardon the expression, cosmic way by the thinking now occurring. The hot dog is the body of Christ, but it is so in a it's in a different way, but that difference does not destroy its identity with the other food over which this eulogia has been articulated, right?
So far, so good.
So far, so good? Okay. Number 3 on the handout. Can it be thought in the thinking now occurring that the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Christ are embodied in a hot dog, and therefore that Christ essentially embodies... It's the same question, more refined, and then I just repeat, in effect, what I've just said. Not essentially, but materially, as in the preceding. Therefore, there is not only an analogical relationship between the two, but an identity, yet not the same. If the two are identical but different, in what way is this identity of difference constitutive of an essentially ecclesiastical body, which is de facto beyond, would it be beyond, self-consciously belonging to the church? I think it's garbled. The question runs together things which I quickly try and indicate that gently by saying self-consciously belonging is redundant. So you really got to parse out, you got to separate the terms in the question. But the bottom line answer I give is that the different are identical for the first time. That's fundamental to thinking now occurring. And by the way, as far as that goes, I mean, in other words, I can't do everything at once, and I'm not writing the whole thing out here, right? I'm just getting to the nub of it. Hegel could put up his hand and say, well, wait a minute, I say something very similar to that. Right? The whole dialectic is an identification of the different. The difference, TS in Hegel, are the self and the other that are identical. You see? So while I'm saying the different are identical, it's understood here in the larger picture that the difference are different. They're not self-other related, number one. And number two, I think I must add for the first time, and in Hegel, this is an eternal identity. It's certainly not a first-time identity in the same way in which he takes a license to abstract the universal this from all of the concrete, non-philosophical pointing that might otherwise go on in the purely sensuous realm. All right, so Plato and Aristotle resurface in Hegel, and there is a kind of ultimate. In other words, Badiou's out and out contempt for what he calls the human animal is not an idiosyncratic stance of Badiou's. It's not idiosyncratic. It's deep in modernity. It starts with Descartes. Not that he intended it, but when Descartes unmoored his soul essentially and substantially from his body and from nature, he just opened wide the gate for all kinds of abstractions from the concrete reality of the world. Hegel's being a masterful version, Badiou's being a little trickier, but equally compelling intellectually. All right. And then I go on. For the first time, the host and the hot dog are identically a person. Go back, and what I was saying 5 minutes ago, that whole routine there. For the first time, one is beyond the other, beyond the other, I'm sorry. Such is the very structure of the church. So, and I'm picking up on the use of I'm following your introducing the question of an ecclesiastical body. And I'm not sure what you intended by that, because I read the question as problematically formulated, but I'm making a certain assumption, and I'm saying, and I say this in Novitas Mundi, this is right out of the gate in the appendices to Novitas Mundi. I don't explain it, I hadn't thought it through, it's just clear in the first pass, that the church and the universe, and now I would add very explicitly, I think it's there effectively in Novitas Mundi, and the body that we're talking about, these are all different ways of talking about the same reality, right? So the church, in the fullest sense of the word, is the universe. Do you see? Okay, there's a whole thing to be said there, which we haven't got time. Creation is newly embodied in the risen Christ. As never before, the absolute analogy of being, for the first time being absolute with relation, which is a succinct way of saying what I was trying to say before, in further answer to Nancy's original question about what we mean by body here. What we mean by body is this I think you could say intercourse. I don't hesitate because of any sexual connotation, not at all, but only because of the we have to parse inter there. But certainly the intercourse of the interrelationship between all of the whole of infinite particulars. You see, that is the absolute with relation, or the absolute with relationship, which is the church, or the absolute with relationship, which is the universe. You see, or the absolute with relationship, which is the body of Christ. All of those would be different ways, technically correct ways of saying what I'm saying there more succinctly. The Logos absolutely now for the first time. The Logos word beyond, different, other. And then I refer you to the handout of 129, where in that third stage, in the logical one stage, the thinking now occurring stage on page 1 of the first handout, after first in 0 saying let me look at it so I get it right. I don't want to misstate it. Where is it? Oh, it's on this. Oh, that's not it. I need my first handout somewhere. We're on page 1 of the first handout. Number 3, the first line in number 3 after the introduction there on page 1 of the first handout, Jesus is embodied in the Word, and the Word is embodied in Jesus. And so I'm just referring back there as a concrete, so that's where we're at now, all right? So we have a new development. What I call that in Beyond Sovereignty is omnipotence moving to new ground, right? So we have, if you want to talk in stages, we have a new stage now, and that's the stage at which there's this direct embodiment of Jesus, the incarnate Word, with the Word qua Word, whereas previously what I'm saying is that Jesus, who is the incarnate Word, was embodied specifically qua Spirit, and before that qua Father. Okay. To what extent is the consumer of the hot dog the Catholic priest? And I couldn't resist pointing out that the latter, that is, the Catholic priest, may be the former. He may be a consumer of the hot dog anytime he pleases, provided he maintains a healthy weight and balanced diet. Okay. On the other hand, even nutritionally, he could go to hell if he chooses, right? Nothing would prevent him eating too many hot dogs. The former, that is, the priest can,
No, the consumer.
I mean, the consumer of the hot dog may not be the lad, as the Catholic priest, without being chosen by others and ordained. That is, without occupation. All right, so this is the ordained part. I'm just borrowing that from the standard ecclesiastical language, right? But so why do they talk about ordination? What are we talking about, right? Well, strange as it may seem, it's really simple. It comes from order. It comes from the notion of order, arrangement, you see. So in the church historically, and this would apply to both Catholic and Protestant churches, at least in those churches in which there is an ordination. Now, it's true that there's so many Protestant churches nowadays, it's hard to keep up, okay? There are 33,000 denominations, last time I checked, Protestant denominations in the United States alone, okay? So I'm speaking, let's say, of the mainline Protestant denominations will still speak of ordination, okay? The point being that they understand, even though they're separated in some way from the Roman Catholic Church, they still understand that the body of Christ is an arrangement. It's an ordering, you see? It's an order. So the role of the priest is to occupy a certain place in that arrangement of places, okay? And since, as I point out, and I don't quote myself, well, I do, I kind of quote myself indirectly and then refer back in Foundation, again, 3.5, in the relationship of these particular places that constitute the body of Christ in the narrowest sense of the word as what Augustine would understand as the visible church, you see? That visible church, the one you can go down and register in, you see? It understands itself qua body of Christ to be an order, an oikonomia, you see, in the language of beyond sovereignty, an economy, a distribution of the Father's house. And in the Father's house there are paloi manai, many places, is really the best translation. Many rooms is kind of crude. I'm trying to avoid all these types of questions. This is not what I want to do the New Testament.
Dave, can you repeat Serena's question?
I don't want to repeat it. You'll have to listen to the tape. Zarina asks, can we, meaning I guess us guys here, and you included, of course, can we ordain if we were, in some definitive sense, the church? I think we could do that. That immediately raises the question as who are the members of the church? And then if I put it in simple, short, theological language, which is not at variance with the thing now coming, but it's just to the point, that raises the question that theologically is a stumbling block for some, if not many, if not most Protestants. That raises the question, and that's why the Roman Catholic Church does come to mind as consonant with the thinking now occurring. It raises the question of what's called a communion of saints. And it immediately, in the context of the thinking now occurring, and certainly in the context of Benedict the 16th, it immediately understands that if you're talking about the church, even if you want to specify the church, in other words, forget the church of the universe a moment. We got enough problems, okay? You see that? Okay? But if we follow the narrow-minded tendency of Zarina's questioning, if we narrow the question down to the church of us guys sitting around, you cannot understand the church as simply not only the guys just sitting around here, but not only the guys sitting around who you might be able to, at least theoretically, to collect in one place sometime, maybe. But if you mean by that those who are still alive in the natural sense, no, that won't cut it. You need to include the ones that are dead. Because they're still alive, you understand? I mean, if you read the gospel, you know that. They ain't dead. You just think they're dead, or they're dead in some sense, but in another sense, in the sense that counts, they're not dead. So they have a voice. They get a vote. If you want to make a democracy out of it, see, the problem is if we make a democracy out of it, we're all going to be outvoted. Right? So there's so many dead saints. Right? Okay, but you get the thrust of what I'm saying. Everything depends on who we are when you ask that question. And who we are is not, the answer to that is not a simple answer because it involves the whole church. So even if someone is delegated, you're forcing me to do things I don't want to do. Not because I don't want to do them in principle, although I'd rather not, but mostly because I want to stay to the text, and I'm having a lot of trouble getting to the text.
Why can't you just say no?
I'm just too nice.
No.
Well, the answer is no, but it's not. It doesn't in a class in a philosophical or theological or intellectual discussion. No doesn't cut it. I mean, you have to say why. So no, because there's not enough of us here. Presumably for openers, we could parse that, but that would be the initial answer. And then there's a deeper answer too, which is we don't quite have the authority to do so. Who elected us to elect him? And that does take us back, even if I can't grab the paper. That takes us back to the text, because Jesus, in today's gospel, I think, he not only tells the disciples, one of his, if not the parting shot is, I will send you the Spirit, and he breathes on them, and effectively, in Mark 20, we got to do some text here. In Mark 20, 21, 23. All right, so John has had it. He's become a victim of natural time. Did I say that right? No.
21, 23?
No, I'm sorry. Oh, no, it's John. Okay, so John gets a reprieve. In John, I think so. I hope I have this right. I hope I have my numbers right.
No.
20. Yeah. Page 1788 in our text. In the Gospel of John, it's going to be what? Chapter 20, verse 21 and following. Jesus appears to the apostles. This is after the resurrection. And this is also relates to the question of the Spirit now, right? So even though he's still hanging around saying a few parting words, the Spirit is already coming on the scene at this point. It's kind of a transition stage, as it were. He says, "Peace be with you. As the Father sent me, so I am sending you." I hope I don't have to fill in about the stick figure there, right? You got that? Okay. Then he says something new, right? After saying this, he breathed on them as an indication that we're talking about, this is a physical manifestation, sign of the Spirit. Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive anyone's sins, you are forgiven. If you retain anyone's sins, they are retained. So in other words, this would be just a concrete example of what I was about to say to Zarina in response to her question. By what authority would us or any segment of the church, you see, ordain anyone? Okay? And so the text tells me that Jesus gave some special authority to Peter, right, which becomes a debatable thing when Protestantism emerges, you see. There's a preliminary for that debate in what's called the Great Schism in the early part of the 11th century that separated the Eastern and Western churches. And it wasn't the only issue. There's a theological issue about the filioque, whether in the Trinity the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Right? The Son is generated by the Father. The Spirit proceeds from the Father. That goes back to the Council of Nicaea in 325, ratified in 381 by the Council of Constantinople. Okay. So the definition of the Trinity is as old as the 4th century. That's clear. However, along the way, now here, see, these are historical questions that are, okay. it's just take my word for it. It's complicated. I was about to say in the West, but then it's complicated because there are also examples of this in the East, okay? But generally speaking, in the West, there was added to the creed, shared universally by the church before the modern period, the words "and the Son," so that the Spirit was added, the Spirit to the original text, the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. That, all right, so, okay. I say historically that's, okay. Just leave that there. So, along with that issue, and by the way, again, in another course, which we're not doing, it would be interesting to think what the relationship between that cause of rupture is to the other cause of rupture, and that was the unwillingness of the patriarchs of the Eastern Church to practically, effectively acknowledge the supremacy of the Bishop of Rome, right? The successor of Peter. Okay. Now, how did I get into that? Okay, so the question that Zarina is asking raises all kinds of questions, both about the extent of the church, which includes the living and the dead. If I put it in traditional theological terms, those who are in heaven and those who are on earth, and also, by the way, depending on what where your theology is at, those in purgatory, those who are somewhere in between, gets kind of, right? But that's the church, right? And then within that church, are all the places the same? Well, in the thinking now occurring, absolute particularity, I mean, one thing we know absolute particularity can't mean is absolute sameness. It's got to mean absolute difference. So it's got to mean that every place in reality, see, I want to get off the Church of Romans. Logically, every place in reality is absolutely specific. It's right. The difference is thoroughgoing, right? And therefore, I can intelligibly ask the question: given who I am, the place that I occupy, or the place that I am, depending on how you want to look at it, vis-a-vis the place that someone else is, which of us is in the place to choose you as our favorite hot dog eater? Did you say? All right, so there is a question of authority, but where authority is rooted in the notion of an absolute differentiation, specification of place. So if I go back to the text, the choice of the 12, right, is a selection, an appointment, if you want, of these persons given certain authority, which they then handed on, passed on to those who. Now, see, here's where the stick figure becomes central. You see, these 12 were rooted in, I don't like that word, embodied in Jesus in an absolutely specific way. And even the 12 of them were not the same way done so, right? So the preeminence of Peter, you see, goes to Peter, right? Now, when Peter dies, who's going to occupy his place? Now, it is the place of the 11. And they do this, by the way, in the gospel somewhere when they got to replace Judas. So this is a practical. See, if you would ask the question the right way, I wouldn't get so taken aback. See, so how come they can replace? How can they replace Judas with Matthias? I think is his name, if I recall. Anyway, they have to fill in the hole there. We need 12 guys. Because each of them, it is their place, taken together, you see, to say to someone, you are the Jesus Christ in this particular form. In other words, you are, as we are embodied in Christ, then you are going to fill the place vacated by Judas, right? So if we were the church, In other words, if it were that simple, if that's all there were to it, then yes, we could do that. In other words, if the hot dog eater was the dead pope, we could replace him with Todd, or we could select him. Well, we couldn't select him to begin with, because to begin with, he's selected by the man. He's selected by Jesus, and that's
I thought he was actually selected by the Father, because whoever is attracted to Jesus is that according to John. No, am I get it wrong?
It would be too easy if it were wrong. It's right, but it needs to be parsed. Selected, the way I was using the term, in the context of the New Testament, is chosen. Jesus chooses. The Father leads, and Jesus chooses from among those who are led to him by the Father. He chooses. So he chooses the ones. He chooses, in effect, the ones the Father wants, but it's not simply that the Father chooses independently of the action of Jesus. Right? So it's again because of the mutual embodiment there. So what was I saying? Okay, so now I was going to reflect then on this question of authority. You see, it's a whole issue in itself. It came up a little bit in our QQ class, I think authority did. Somebody asked a question, and I gave an answer about he who provides increase. He who one has authority if I didn't draw it out, but I gave you the etymology, right? So the one who has authority is the one who, I guess you could say, if I do this in New Testament terms, the one who has authority is the one who contributes to the life of the body, to the life of the church, the life of whatever, the life of the world. Well, we know by definition in opening of John's Gospel, Jesus is the life of the world. Do you see? So he has the absolutely unqualified authority to begin with, and since his designation, which is a weak term here, is really him having them be one in him and he one in them as he is one with the Father and the Father is one with him. He repeats that several places throughout these texts. You see? So what he's saying is that he embodies them in him in a certain special way, all right? And they in turn taking his place without displacing him, and here I draw, that's in my fifth answer to your question, fifth paragraph. Here I'm drawing on the kind of logic I develop in Beyond Sovereignty 3.3 in a totally different context, where I'm talking about the truth occupying the love of the body up in the corner of the box, occupying the central box on the bottom line, the love of the truth, and it does so, I point out there, without displacing the love of the truth, right? So in other words, if you're beyond X, then one thing occupying the place of another doesn't mean ontologically the displacing of that whose place you're occupying. You see? So the apostles, after Jesus goes back to the Father, they occupy the place of Jesus. And they do so in specifically different ways depending on how they were embodied in him by him. All right? But now they also going to drop dead. Right? You see? So in the meantime, they in turn, in the place of Jesus, embodied in him embodied in them, they embody others in their specific roles, if we're talking about the church. It's that kind of thing. So that's where this issue, and that's where we get the issue with the Anglican Church, and that's the difference in Roman eyes between the Anglican Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, that even though the Eastern Orthodox Church broke with the Western Church, the Western Church understands that they maintained the apostolic transmission of what I would call embodiment, you say, whereas that apostolic transmission is understood in Rome to have been broken in the Anglican tradition at some point. Again, it's a historical question, a technical question to which I don't know the detailed answers. But anyway, that's the broad issue. All right, so in the creed, that same creed I'm telling you about in 325, 381, the Nicene Creed, at the end, among the things belief in which is affirmed is belief in the church, but the church is qualified, guess what, in 4 ways. Is this a conspiracy or what? Pythagoras was onto something, that very intelligent pagan that he was, right? The church is qualified in which we believe as 1, right, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. You see? I'm almost tempted to say, this is right off the cuff, so I can take this back. You understand? I'm almost tempted to say apostolic comes in the 4th place. That must be pretty foundational. Do you see that? Must be pretty foundational. And why is it foundational? You see? In other words, what I guess we could say, I guess I'm 1.
Oh, 1.
1 is first. 1.
Got it.
Holy, Catholic, and apostolic. I think that works pretty well for apostolic being foundational. But that's another class. Okay. What I was going to say was when we normally think of this issue, if we speak in traditional, thoughtless terms about the church, okay, it seems to be a legal issue. That's what I was getting at. Do you see that? We think of this in traditional, mindless terms as a juridical question. Whether or not the transmission was broken, wasn't broken, and you're tempted to say, what difference does it make? We all believe. Why can't we appoint a hot dog maker? Well, if it were merely a legal question in the natural human sense, yeah, you could maybe make a case for that. But there would be some conservatives who would be opposed to even that, right? But what I'm saying, it's not at all a legal question in that sense. You see, it's an ontological question. It's a question of embodiment in the Word, and embodiment in the incarnate Word. And to be really incarnate means, you see, that he didn't exist in abstraction from Peter and James and John any more than the this exists in abstraction from the paper of which this is said. Do you get what I'm saying? In other words, you can't abstract the place you're in, church-wise or otherwise, from your relationship, you see, to the body. And the ultimate constitution of the body is the oikonomos, the distributor of the dwelling. All right, he is the body, as it were, writ large. You see, who, in that sense, assigns the place to others. Now, on Voltraud's behalf, I have to say, as I'm saying that, I do recall there is a passage in which, when James, I think it's in Mark's Gospel. Remember Mark's Gospel, when James and John asked if they could be on the right and left hand of Jesus, and he does say, "It's not for me to allot places. You see, it's for my Father." But the explanation for that would be qua man, speaking qua man. Okay.
Their desire, they were speaking.
Yeah, they're looking
men
right
than
now. Of course, the other thing in the gospel here and other gospels, the washing of the feet is really the answer to that question. In other words, if you want to be first, you have to be last, right? Peter objects when Jesus washes his feet. "Oh no, Lord, never! You shouldn't wash my feet. Not at all. If I don't wash your feet, you have no meras. You have no share. You have no part with me." You see? So the share, I don't know how it got lost somewhere along the line. The absolute particularity of the structure of reality that is more, I guess I could say fairly, I think it's fair to say, more or less, and that would be the problem, more or less explicit in the text when it's looked, and explicit when you look at it through the lens, as it were, of the thing now occurring. Somehow it gets lost along the way, or at least in large part it tends to get lost, right? Because somehow or other, especially in the modern period, we begin to think in terms of containers. And we think in terms of self, and therefore we think of an individual. We think of ourselves as somehow fundamentally alone, and therefore we congregate together to keep off the darkness. Some people can't be alone. But if you're not alone to begin with, hey, not a problem. Right? If there is no isolation of individuals one from another. If to be a person is to be in relationship with all the others, one way or the other, right? Then a number of problems just don't even come up. A certain number of problems don't come up. And authority doesn't mean lording it over others either, you see, as the washing of the feet indicates, right? It means doing a service to others, which they need. Hey, your feet are dirty. Okay. Okay. All right. Mark. All right. Well, one thing we must do today, if we do nothing else in Mark, is the where is that? Is the first one, Mark 4:120 on today's handout. The sower of the seed. Let's see if we can find the actual text here before we look at my abstraction from it. Yeah, the parable of the sower on page 1664 of our text, 1664. And it says, again, he began to teach them by the lakeside. But such a huge crowd gathered round him that he got into a boat on the water and sat there. The whole crowd were at the lakeside on land. He taught them many things in parables. And in the course of his teaching, he said to them, listen, imagine a sower going out to sow. Now it happened that as he sowed, some of the seed fell on the edge of the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some seed fell on rocky ground where it found little soil, and at once sprang up, because there was no depth of earth. And when the sun came up, it was scorched, and not having any roots, because of the shallowness of the soil, it withered away. Some seed fell into thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it produced no crop. And some seeds fell into rich soil, grew tall and strong, and produced a good crop. The yield was 30, 60, even 100-fold, which kind of reminds me of the parable of the talents, which we did in another different context, and we inevitably will do again when we get to the Gospel of Matthew, of the different. In other words, the issue in Matthew will be not whether you got 5 talents or 10 talents or 1 talent. It'd be what did you or did you not do with it? Okay, all right. But then anyway, here you have that same threefold distribution. In this case, a harvest of various dimensions. When he was alone, the 12, together with the others who formed his company, asked what the parables meant. He told them, to you is granted the secret of the kingdom of God, but to those who are outside, everything comes in parables. Now, I want to add something here, or highlight something, which elsewhere in today's reading, if I could put my finger on it, I could. There are so many different things to point out, but I can point it out generally. You may remember exactly where it is. He talks here of the secret of the kingdom. Now, number one, going back to something we were saying earlier in one of Zarina's earlier questions about parables, first of all, yes, he does talk in parables so that these people in general don't understand. But then he does take his disciples aside and explain it to them, or at least attempt to. Right? They're pretty thick, as this gospel points out. They don't fully understand, right? But he does make the attempt to explain it to them. The point I'm getting at is, he says explicitly, to you is granted the secret of the kingdom of God. So he reveals the secret. And elsewhere in today's assignment, he makes the point that nothing is hidden except to be disclosed. You see? Nothing is kept secret except to be revealed. All right? So we have to be very careful here that the whole point of any mention of secret or hiddenness, or the whole point of speaking in such a way that some people don't understand, has to be understood in the context that the ultimate message is precisely one of revelation, or if I put it in terms that Heidegger would understand, and certainly did understand, of aletheia, of truth, where the Greek truth means it's the alpha privative, no longer hidden. Right? So when Jesus says, I am the way, the life, and the truth, you see, he is the ultimate revelation. Now, granted, it's not clear, it's not crystal clear for sure to the disciples, and so the Spirit will be sent, my language now, in consideration of the limitations of human nature, to spend the time in the world, so to speak, clarifying and leading you into the complete truth, you see. But the complete truth, he says, I think it's in today's gospel or is it in John's gospel, the Spirit is not going to tell you anything he hasn't heard from me. So it's all, everything the Spirit's going to tell you, it's here now in your presence. You don't get it. Okay, it's going to be explained to you in great detail. It may take a couple of thousand years. Eventually you're going to get it, but I got news for you. Whatever you're going to get, you're looking at it. Right? Yeah.
And so
Nancy speaking. Yeah.
Connected with the word fulfilled.
Okay.
Is it?
Well, in what context?
That nothing's hidden, namely, it's secret until it's revealed.
Yes, and it's being revealed.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be a way of putting it, I think. In the New Testament, it's being revealed.
Right.
If I use the language that Todd used, the philosophical language, it's being essentially revealed. The essence of it is being revealed.
So does that have something to do, does the word fulfilled have something to do with that?
Well, fulfillment comes in with the notion of the proclamation of Jesus, which opens the Gospel of Mark. Jesus going around saying, repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Believe in the good news and repent. That's literally what he says. And that kairos, that is the time, is now. This is the fulfillment, right? And in that sense, yes, it's a fulfilling of the time when the whole of the truth is revealed in the person of Jesus. He is the truth, but the comprehension of that is going to require he's going to get an assist from the Spirit. Yeah.
So there's no representation in Revelation. I mean, it's not about... So the parables also are not representation. Namely, I'm not going to hand you some description of the truth.
Well, certainly not representation, I think, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah.
It reminds me of something I was doing in Gospel of John last time, in that passage where he speaks of he's chewing out the children of the devil. And he says, if you believe in God, I forget how he phrases it, you would hear only he who believes in God or is related to God, right, hears the words of God, right? So I think what you're driving at, I would say, sounds right. In other words, all the words of the Scripture, including the parables, explained or unexplained, would be taken as revelatory.
Yeah.
Right? And in that sense, not representational?
Yeah.
Is that what you're going?
Yeah.
I think that's right. Okay. However, all that said, differentiating, parsing, he goes on to explain it. First quoting from Isaiah about the fact that some look but never perceive, listen but never understand, to avoid changing their ways and being healed. I don't know whether the to avoid captures the thought of that. It may be more with the result that, if you know what I'm saying. Not so, right? In other words, it's not so much the intention, but the fact. He said to them, "Do you not understand this parable?" He shows a certain amount of impatience with these guys, which you can understand. Then how will you understand any of the parables? That's all I do. I go around talking in parables, and you don't get this one. This is pretty simple. What's so difficult about this? What the sower is sowing is the word. Okay, so now he explains it as a good teacher would, right? It's the word. Those on the edge of the path where the word is sown are people who have no sooner heard it than Satan at once comes and carries away the word that was sown in them. I stop there. Now, if you're paying attention, you want to talk about, wait a minute, not so fast. What did you just say? The sower is sowing the word. Those on the edge of the path where the word is sown are people who have no sooner heard it than Satan at once comes and carries away the word that was sown in them. I'm getting confused. Are they to be identified with the edge of the path and they're receiving the word, but they're not good ground for the word? Is the word being sown in them, or are they the word? Right? Let me go further with that. Satan at once comes and carries away the word that was sown in them. So it looks like they're the word. It looks like they're the ground. Similarly, those who are sown on patches of rock are people who, when they first hear... Wait a minute. See, now my confusion I'm getting more confused.
I see.
You see what I'm getting at?
Yes.
Those who those who are sown on patches of rock are people. So the people are the seed that falls on the rock. Is that right? But you just said the people with the ground in the sense of the edge where the seed just bounced off, right? You got it? You got the problem? Who, when they first, it's nothing like careful reading, heard the word, welcome it at once with joy. But they have no root deep down and do not last. All right? So those people are seeds with no roots. Should some trial come or some persecution on account of the word, at once they fall away. Then there are others who are sown in thorns. These have heard the word, but the worries of the world, the lure of riches, and all the other passions come in to choke the word, and so it produces nothing. And there are those who have been sown in rich soil. They hear the word and accept it and yield a harvest, 30 and 60 and 100-fold. All right? I think there it's ambiguous whether the yield, you would think the yield of the harvest, that the ground would be yielding the harvest that was good ground in which the seed was sown. Okay, but you notice the confusion I'm talking about. So if you look at what I did on the handout, that got me thinking about it. I mean, that wasn't the only thing that got me thinking about it. And so I just parse it out a little bit here on the handout on the Mark 4, 1-20, and I break it down there some are seed sown on ground near the path, seed, word, he's told us that the seed is the word, which is heard, lands. All right, so in other words, to hear the word is to be the ground on which they hear it, it lands on them, so to speak, but then of course it's sown in them, but immediately taken away by Satan. All right, so I'm just highlighting the confusion that's running through here. Then the second is the seed sown, right? Some people, in other words, understand some there. Some people are seed sown on rocky ground, seed, word, heard, land sown in them, and it's sown in them, right? And received with joy, yes, begins to grow, but without roots, does not last when persecution comes. And then seed sown on ground covered with thorns, seed, word, heard, land sown in them, and grows, but is choked and made unfruitful by the words of life, the false attractiveness of wealth, and the desire to have the things that are lacking. Now, visually, you should be able to see where I'm going here. In the explanation of the three types of unproductive seeds, there is a confusion between the persons as either the seed on the unreceptive or useless ground, or the ground which itself is unreceptive and useless for producing a good harvest. There's a kind of ambiguity there, for want of a better term. That'll do. That's all we need. We just need the ambiguity. That's number one. The second thing you notice about it is there are only three options there. Right down below, visually, verbally, there's a fourfold right away. Whereas when I get to the fourth option, the fourth option is itself a fourfold. Right? In other words, I go back to the original explanation. Some falls on, some don't get the word, or they get it, but it's stolen. It's immediately stolen from them after they've heard it. Some get the word, they're very happy. Oh yeah, hey, that sounds good to me, right? Until the rent comes due, and they have to steal money from mom to get the rent, steal somebody's identity in order to pay for the cars, right? Or whatever, right? And then the third group, likewise, overcome by the trials and tribulations of life, or actually even more affirmatively for lack of satisfaction. They want more. Okay. And then there's the seed that falls on the good ground. That's in the explanation. But when you look carefully at the seed that falls on the rich or good ground, it's a fourfold situation, right? Because, in other words, it's further specified that seed has three, I'm going to use a Hegelian word here, take it right back, I don't mean it, 3 moments, 3 different forms of the word that falls on good ground. The word or the seed that's heard, right, where people hear the word, they listen, and they accept it, and they bear fruit. And there my logical parenthetical digits are to draw your attention to the parallel in the index of the ethic of simplicity. Okay? In other words, the good ground, that's the universal moment. That's the bold one. That's the foundational moment. That's the creative moment of gratitude, the reciprocal relationship between the creator and the creature. That's right. To be grounded in that is the foundation that is equally near or equally far from each of the three dimensions of the cube: edge, square, and cube. All right. Each of those three moments, and those three moments are, it's one thing to hear. If we stop there, which of course we don't do in the ethic of simplicity, because yes, we can distinguish 0 and unum and 1, but we don't understand that you can have any one of those three outside of that body, you see, and not having them outside of that body has having them equally, each of them individually and together with one another, or any two of them together with one another, together with the third, grounded in that foundational unity, right? Which in this parable is the rich or the good, or in Greek the kalan, really beautiful soil. Beautiful soil. I mean, if you were a farmer, you'd translate it beautiful. That's beautiful land, right? If you're planning on sowing some rye or barley there. Okay. So what I'm getting at, but notice then, just to emphasize the point, these are in the negative. These are three different kinds of people. The top paragraph, three different kinds of people. And then there's a fourth kind of person. The ones that fall on the good ground or are good ground, depending on the confusion in the metaphor. You see? But when I zoom in on the ones who are or fall on the good ground, the threesome, the positive analog to the negative three different types is the same. It's the same person. I mean, it doesn't cut it if you're on good ground and you merely get the seed. If you get the seed, you see, you better hear it carefully. You may receive it from another. I think it's the translation of the Greek that goes to the specificity, the definiteness, the discretionary, the discreting of the second moment of the unum moment. All right. So one thing to hear, to be open to the word. The next thing is to get it from another, to realize that it's not coming from you. There's something other or different here, you see? There's something new here, and there's nothing newer than the word through whom the world was created ex nihilo. That's newness in self, absolutely embodied. What more could you ask for, right? So you're open to the word, you hear it in that generalized sense, in the sense you're listening. You're paying it. I think there was a translation for the akuo. I'm pretty sure you can translate it in certain Greek contexts as, what's the word? On ear, that's not, on the alert. There's a phrase in English. Anyway, it's listening, right? It's that watchfulness in the, this is a whole other issue. We have a saving for the apocalypse, right? When Jesus talks about the end of the world in different contexts, or either the end of destruction of Jerusalem, which I was referring to in a different context before, or as a type of perhaps the end of the world, which does get discussed elsewhere, okay? What's his solution to that? Watchfulness, readiness, okay? But what I'm getting at is the readiness, clearly, the first step, listening, paying attention, being on the alert. There's another word, it's like a cocked ear or something, with ear cocked.
What's the QV?
No, it's more listening. It doesn't make any difference. But the point is listening and then to hear. That means you're listening and you just keep listening and you don't hear anything. Hey, that's not going to work. So you need to hear. You need to see what's different. You need to perceive the new. You need to discriminate or distinguish the body in the language of Paul vis-a-vis the Eucharist, right? And then you need to, as it were, logically, you need to produce, right? So the receptive productivity that's spoken of in the index of simplicity and assigned to the creative moment, the foundational moment, that productive receptivity is worked out in this threefold way in the thing. But the point I'm trying to get at is that it's in the fourth moment here, Could it be the apostolic moment in the parable of the sower? Right? It's so interesting, so interesting. I never thought of this before. Thank you. I mean, really, the concrete. Because when I'm defining creator, creation, omnipotence, created omnipotence in Beyond Sovereignty, what I'm really talking about there is this witness, this absolute witness, which goes right to the very foundations of reality and the foundations of creation. Creation means witness. Absolutely. You see, of which the incarnation is just kind of the crowning, absolutely revelatory. I just hate these again words. Moment, event. I like event better. Right? It's the event in which the absolute witness, which is the foundation of the world, becomes crystal clear. Now, the other thing I want to say about this, that ambiguity, which I'm glad you noticed this, not just me, right? You noticed it. That ambiguity and notice it's an ambiguity. It's only there in the where things aren't working out, where either nothing's taking root, or it's dying out, or it's getting eaten up by thorns, right? That ambiguity are these bad guys, these non-productive guys, these ultimately non-receptive. If you judge non-receptivity by, don't tell me you got eaten up by thorns. I'm not interested. I mean, I don't have a harvest. You see? I'm a bottom line guy. Right? If I reap where I haven't sown, I don't want to hear any excuses. Which reminds me of something else that I'm definitely going to get to today in Mark. So what I'm getting at is that in that ambiguity I'm saying is not accidental. It points to the fact that the non-productive receptivity is precisely that these unproductive seeds are confusing themselves or able to be confused with the ground into which they're supposed to be falling. They come in between, you see, the creative act of God and they substitute themselves for the ground, which the Creator is and is explicitly in His Word, right? In what now Eucharistically becomes the body of Christ. They are their own ground, or they're confused, and confused doesn't cut it. It doesn't cut it.
Is that modernity?
Yeah. Oh, it's modernity in spades. I think. Yeah. But it's not just modernity. But modernity kind of legitimizes that confusion. Yeah. Okay, so since I said I'm going to do it, and then we can always come back to other things that I want to do. Now, what is that other one? Oh, the fig tree. Where is the fig tree? Fig tree is Mark 11:12. I don't know whether I put it on the paper. I probably didn't. But it's pretty straightforward. Chapter 11, verse 12. The barren fig tree. Next day in 11:12, as they were leaving Bethany, he felt hungry. Seeing a fig tree and leaf some distance away, he went to see if he could find any fruit on it. But when he came up to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he addressed the fig tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say this. They don't say anything because they have a lot of trouble following along in general. They're very shy of asking questions because they're afraid of they're like students, they're afraid of revealing their ignorance or something. Okay. And so we have and then we have a little intermission here. This is just to build the punchline. See, Mark gives us a little excursion to the temple. And next day, he says, next morning, as they passed by in 11:20, they saw the fig tree withered to the roots. Peter remembered. "Look, Rabbi," he said to Jesus, "the fig tree that you cursed has withered away." Jesus answered, "Have faith in God. In truth, I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Be pulled up and thrown into the sea,' with no doubt in his heart, but believing what he says will happen, it will be done for him. I tell you, therefore, everything you ask and pray for, believe that you have it already, and it will be yours. Now, if you're paying any attention in general, you know we're at a beyond the beyond moment. You see? So the otherwise incomprehensible notion that I could pray for something that I have already, or pray for something which in some sense I don't have, but if I pray for it as if I had it, I will have it. You see? So in other words, that line, which seems so neat to us between the past and the future, or the present and the future, is completely obliterated here. But notice the obliteration of that line is grounded in what? In this thing called faith, right? In this thing called zero, know nothing, zero, not right? Perfect openness and receptivity, which, as you pointed out, I think in a different context earlier today, is that which is prepared for by the Spirit at the prompting of the Father. Okay? So that's the first thing I want to say here. But the other thing, which is more striking, I think, about this passage, and what's really neat about it, by the way, is that the other evangelists, now that we've got, Voltaire got me using that word, the other evangelists tell similar stories about a fig tree. When we get to it, you'll see that it's slightly different. What's striking about Mark's version, which I like, because remember, Mark is the spare gospel. Lean and mean, no BS. Let's get to the point here. That's bottom line, okay? What's distinctive about Mark, Luke is a softie. When we get to Luke, I hate to give it away, but when we get to Luke, Jesus notices, or no, it's a parable in Luke, as I recall, if I got it right. It's a parable, but it's the same story in a parable form. And the owner of the vineyard or something says, what's going on with that tree? It's not producing anything. And cut it down, he says to his steward. Right? And the steward says, oh, master, please, let me water it and put some manure on it and so forth. It'll be productive. Okay, all right. The fig tree in Luke gets a second chance because Luke is into love. He's a lover. Okay? But in Mark, no second chance, right? That wouldn't be bad enough. That'd be bad enough. I mean, compared to Luke, there's no slack cut here. But it's worse than that. The reason there are no figs on the tree, because it's not fig season. What? Damn it! How can you blast the fig tree for not bearing figs when it isn't fig season? What do you understand? Well, I don't know how you can do it, but if you're Jesus, you I don't know, you can do it, but you do it. And the reason you do it is that your natural limitations. You're a fig tree that has not been born from above, buddy. Yeah. You're a fig tree that was planted and grew, naturally speaking, but not beyond birth. You see, not beyond nature. So it's a vivid way of pointing out that the bottom line, which I'm saying Mark is a kind of a bottom line guy. Like if you didn't, that's why really one reason for starting with Mark is if you couldn't get to the others, you got the message, right? If you excuse your barrenness by virtue of the limitations of your own nature, then like all those unproductive seeds / grounds in the parable of the sower, what you're doing is you're effectively defining what's possible in terms of yourself as the ground of what's possible. I don't even like the word what's possible, but I'd rather say what's actual. You're defining the actuality of your production in terms. So what I'm getting at is it's not simply that you're saying, oh, I only operate certain times of the year. I mean, that's it's in my nature. That's the way I am, right? Which is perfectly reasonable. Okay? I mean, not the reason that's exploded by faith. It's not reasonable in that sense, right? But it's everyday reasonable. I'm saying it's not simply that it's a claim to my natural limitations, but more fundamentally, it's a claim to a legitimacy of understanding myself to be the ground of the actuality of what I produce.
So this is a situation of lack of faith, isn't it?
It's a situation of lack of faith, which, yes, it is, absolutely. But it's a situation. But the lack of faith means reserving in my thought some notion of self-grounding, some introducing into the absolute transparency of my being grounded in the creative act. To say, introducing some opaqueness, some kind of impurity into that pure transparency. See? Now, is it true that it's hard to be perfect? Oh yeah. Does it follow? See, this explains the relationship between me and Zarina. She's into perfection. I say, absolutely, perfection is where it's at. But okay, I'm not perfect. I admit it. Am I excused? No, I agree. I'm not excused. Okay. So in other words, the imperative is absolute. Kant didn't come out of nowhere. He rationalized faith. He did, but he did rationalize faith. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, he brought it down to what was reasonable, but the residuum, if I can put it that way, the residual of the absolute imperative that's in the gospel, and not just here. The fig tree is a nice, vivid example of it, concrete example of it, but it'll be stated elsewhere. And I quote it in effect, I think somewhere in 3:3, Beyond Sovereignty, when I'm doing I think it comes up in the Sermon on the Mount. Right? And then today, for example, how about being married, no divorce? You didn't miss that, did you? I mean, it's not something we really have to, we don't have to pick that text apart in case you didn't get it the first time. You can't divorce your wife, and you can't.
I thought you could, but you can't divorce your husband.
Well, you can, well, in this gospel, you can't divorce your wife, and you can't divorce your husband. The editor points out that wouldn't apply to Jews, but it would apply to Gentiles, because in Roman law, a woman could divorce her husband. But if you read the Gospel of Matthew, which we will, it's worse than that. That's bad enough, right? Number one. Now, how about in Jewish law, a wife can't divorce her husband, but a husband can divorce his wife. So just in case you thought there was a loophole here, in Matthew, Jesus says, speaking to the Jews now, and a woman divorced by her husband, you think being a fig tree zapped because you were out of season and didn't produce fruit because you're out of season? The poor woman was divorced by this son of a bitch, and she's only 22, right? Wasn't her fault. She didn't divorce him. She didn't want it, right? But she's divorced. Anyone who marries her commits adultery. Tough. Okay. So I want to save Kant from being. He didn't come out. He's the absoluteness in Kant's moral thinking is a rational analog of his Christianity for whatever, in his case, with his Lutheranism. So the root of that absolute demand, absolute imperative, is absolutely explicit here. Now, if you had no recourse, in other words, I have to admit, I think it's pretty tough, and if I said that to Jesus, you know what he would say to me. Get behind me, Satan, as he said to Peter, right? Okay, so it would be very difficult to make this text, acceptable, reasonable. Right? In other words, it seems to be you're either hearing here the words of God or you're not, right? And you're either receptive to it or you're not, and that's the way it is. But I want to say, so divorce is very good. Kierkegaard likes sex because he says human egotism, all human egotism is grounded in the sexual relationship, right? So if you attack the sexual relationship, then you're attacking man. What's the word? You're attacking it where it counts, or where it hurts, or whatever, right? You're zeroing in. So now that's all. To say something that needs to be said, but there is a more positive. To be more positive, we always try to be positive, right? Because there's a lot of negativity in that. The positive thing, of course, is you need to again contextualize it. For Jesus as a Jew, for the Jews, and for Jesus as a Jew, and for Christianity as coming out of Judaism, as fulfilling the Old Testament. One needs to keep in mind the fuller positive meaning of this is that if you read the Old Testament from beginning to end, the relationship between God and Israel, between God and the people here standing ultimately for humanity, but certainly in the immediate proximately to the Jewish people, is the relationship of a husband to his wife. And you'll notice in the New Testament, a couple of the parables, I don't know if it came in Mark, there are parables about I mentioned one the other day, it must be in Matthew or Luke, about the virgins with the lamps going out, waiting for the bridegroom. The image of the bride and the bridegroom, you'll find it in the Gospels, and it's central in the heavenly banquet in the Apocalypse, right? The heavenly bridegroom. Jesus is the bridegroom. He is the Father as the husband of his creation, you see, right? And the whole point of the Old Testament, the prophets and other, you read throughout the Old Testament, God, the Father, the husband, in this case, by analogy, remains faithful through thick and thin. In other words, the people keep going off track. They keep committing idolatry. They keep committing adultery. I mean, it might be literally, but I'm talking in terms of Jewish thought. I think you pick that up in the notes if you read carefully. Adultery has a theological meaning, right, in this context, right? It means worship of other gods. That's the uncleanness theologically, which adultery is. So what I'm getting at is God himself in the Old Testament has made quite clear that there's no excuse. He could have divorced his people anytime. He had ample reason to divorce them. You want to talk about, what's the phrase? Irreconcilable differences. All right. So if you look at the Old Testament, God had irreconcilable differences with his bride, but there was no suggestion that he would divorce them. So in marriage, in the indissolubility of marriage, you have to understand that there are many levels of I like it. Here's a thought which I didn't develop. It came into my head. I'm going to think about this. I thought to myself, this is just all right. So you got the theological background. The Father, God is the husband of his creation. Jesus is the bridegroom of the church. But I thought, just on another more human level, it's something you could think about in terms of thinking now occurring. It really, actually, the indissolubility of marriage really takes seriously. I don't mean sexuality now. That's an issue. I mean sexuation. In other words, it takes with a kind of utter seriousness the relationship between the male and the female. You get a sense of what I'm driving at? I haven't developed that thought. But in other words, this relationship between the husband and the wife, or the man and the woman, right, is somehow very, very important in this context. Right? It's by no means, I don't mean, in other words, I'm trying to get beyond, again, the legalistic view. You understand what I'm trying to drive at? There's something about this sexuality, the difference between men and women, which is somehow or other at the core or at the foundation of what's going on here. It may not fully explain the foundation, right? But it's there. It's interesting, and this is off the top of my head. When I open up Genesis, there are two, talking about textual criticism, right? There are two creation accounts in Genesis. You're aware of that. The one we are familiar with, the one we play around with a lot, although it would be out of favor in today's world, is the one where Eve is a rib out of Adam, right? That's kind of proposed. The other one, which is more in favor, which is very profound, and the first one, is when God says, let us create man in our image. First of all, in our image. So, now, a Jew is going to pass over that. It's a royal we. But a Christian is going to say, oh, wow, interesting. And then, let's create him in our image, male and female. Okay? So there's something... so what I'm getting at is this notion of male and female as the form of the image of the God who is otherwise immaterial, as we like to think of it, you see, is worth pausing over. Okay, we push the clock. We have to go on to Matthew. We'll try and hit the remaining highlights in Mark. And In the meantime, I encourage you, especially since it's so difficult to cover all the ground, please use the question and answer forum for missing, in other words, there may be something that we skipped that you'd like to explore, and bring it up on the question and answer forum is a good place to do that in the meantime, until we see each other again. Okay?
Thank you.